Hey friends, Ashley Berges back today, and today I want to talk about movies, the impact that films and movies have in our life, and how some of these films actually have a psychological impact that we might not even be aware of. Okay, so today we're talking about the impact of films on our life, and in particular, we're going to actually psychologically deconstruct the film The Matrix. Joining me today in studio, David Williams. David Williams is, well, he's an expert in international law, contract law, as well as national and constitutional law, and he's also a good friend of mine. David, great to have you in studio today.
Great to be here, Ashley. I'm looking forward to deconstructing this Matrix for everyone.
I like that. You know, I think it's a film that many of us were impacted at such a level because when we talk about it in circles of people that I know, I mean, think about it. You sit there and talk about Neo as the character. You talk about the other characters. You talk about the impact that you feel about fighting for something that you want or fighting for some sort of freedom. And a lot of people have a certain different take on it. But what I've heard most people tell me is they've seen it over and over again, and it never gets boring.
I would have to say that I saw this movie in 1999 when it first came out. I was living in St. Kitts at the time, and my wife at the time, we came in from St. Kitts. We stayed with a friend in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And that night, he pulls out the video. He pulls out a DVD. He's rented it. I haven't seen it because we've been out of the country for 4 or 5 months. Mm-hmm. And he says, "You got to watch this." And went through the entire movie, and certain things would happen. I go, okay, well, that was what this is about. And then he would go, okay, well, what about that? And I go, no, that's what that's about. And what was really kind of funny about the whole thing was he said, "How did you see all this in the movie?" I said, it's because of my background, and I see this legal tie-in with the Matrix, and you're talking about deconstructing it, but it was because of the background that I was developing at that time to start learning law, learning about rights, learning about freedom. And of course, the whole journey of the Matrix was the hero's journey to get to that freedom where Zion could be separate from the Matrix. Mm-hmm.
So let's give our viewers a little bit of backstory as to what was really going on at that time. So rewind, prior to seeing the movie, there was a lot of changes that were taking place in your life, and you were doing a lot of soul searching, but a lot of work. And let's, if you could tell, our viewers what you were doing.
Well, the soul searching, yeah, that was one thing, but it all really started with legal problems over a death in the family, and there was a big estate. And we got into a bunch of legal battles and tangles of things that we knew nothing about. And so, as I say, along this path, I cut my teeth on probate law because after 14 months of this nonsense with attorneys and massive amounts of bills, I finally said, okay, they're just going to take the estate away from all of us one billable hour at a time. Mm-hmm. So I decided to go to a law library, and that was in North Carolina. I went to the Supreme Court Law Library right there in North Carolina. And after 2 weeks, I came back home and I said, well, apparently those of us that don't know are at the mercy of liars. Because if I had this information right here 14 months ago, I could have settled that entire estate. In 6 months, it wouldn't have cost a dime.
Wow.
And so, but because we went that far down the path, the attorneys decided that they were going to contact every 3-letter agency you can imagine. So literally the agents of the Matrix were, hello, calling us and, oh, you're out of the country now. Well, now you're a flight risk. All kinds of things that were made up along the way. But once I started studying those things, I found out that law is really not a 4-letter word. It actually is a 3-letter word, even though it has a connotation that really, it's really bad. People want to avoid it. They don't want to get involved, and yet it affects every single thing we do every single day. Now, the reason this became important for me was after beginning to study international law, I found this thing called the right of exile. Mm-hmm. Oh, wait a minute. The keymaker in the Matrix movie was called the Exile. Mm-hmm. But he was the key maker. He made a new key to fit a new door for those people that wanted out. And that's what Neo means, actually. It's a Greek word that means new. So new key, new door. And what I found over time, took several years, but there's this thing in international law called the right of self-determination. And that right is written into the UN Charter, and it's written into tons of UN resolutions and human rights treaties and things like that. So if you, that's kind of a shortcut through the entire path of the movie, but that's what I started with. This was Zion's trek to be separate and apart from the Matrix, to come out of it.
Wow, that's pretty empowering.
It is. It's very empowering. So there's so many scenes along the way. Let's see if you can remember this one. The scene in the park with Neo and the Oracle.
I remember that one.
And she's talking to him about, you've been having bad dreams. We'll get to that in just a second. Remember?
Yeah.
But she's talking about the Matrix itself, and she says a program was written for the birds, and a program was written for this or for everything. Mm-hmm. And sometimes when a program is facing deletion, it will either have to return to the source or it'll choose to hide out in the Matrix. Mm-hmm. And of course, she's saying other things like, anytime you heard of a ghost or a horror story or something weird that happened or a UFO, it's a program doing something that they're not supposed to be doing. Remember that?
Yeah.
And Leo says, "Oh, programs hacking programs."
Right.
But then she makes that comment about sometimes when a program is facing deletion. He said, "Well, why would a program face deletion?" She said, "Well, any number of reasons. Sometimes it just breaks down, or sometimes a better program gets written. The right of self-determination was a better program than the old right of exile, which means you had to leave. Today, the right of self-determination is specifically everything that movie was about people's right to determine their own course, their own political status, their own society, and not be attached to this matrix that had been created for them."
That's amazing. That's neat. Okay, so Neo represents the person that basically finds a way out. Is that basically kind of how you identify yourself to some degree?
Well, what's interesting, the very first thing you see in the movie, because what happened with that whole thing with the probate and the estate, and I was a businessman. And today, of course, I claim I'm a businessman that was forced to learn the law or made to learn the law, or I'm just a businessman that learned the law. So typically in the U.S., that's backwards. They go learn law and then they go into business doing law. Mm-hmm. But the very first thing it says in that movie, and Neo's there at the computer is asleep, and the first thing you see on the computer is the word searching. Mm-hmm. So he was searching. He was searching for a path. And yeah, it kind of signifies remember the other scene in that movie when he finally meets Trinity at this club, right? Mm-hmm. And what does she say? It's the question. It's the question that drives us, right? It's like that splinter in your mind. And she says, "You know the question, don't you?" And he says, "What is the matrix?" And she said, "Do you really want to know what it is?" And so then you have the whole scene where he wakes up in the bed, he's late for work, and he has to go to work. And that's an interesting little scene about being part of that matrix, and people in their daily lives and jobs or whatever. We could look at statistics in the United States. We know that most people that graduate college never go into the profession that they got educated and trained in.
That's true.
Okay, and a lot of people are very disgruntled and upset with their work and their jobs. And they very much are treated in a lot of ways like what happened with Neo when he was late and he's there with the boss. Right?
Exactly.
Remember that scene?
Yeah.
And he says, "Oh, I get it, Mr. Anderson. You think you're special. Mm-hmm. You think the rules don't apply to you."
I like that one.
So, but then from there, the agents are already looking for him. Why? Because he's searching, and now he's been contacted by these people that are already out. Mm-hmm. And so there's an element of the program is like, no, they don't want you out. They're gonna make sure that doesn't happen. And of course, then he's caught and he's dragged in front of these agents. And now that's an interesting thing. "Oh, Mr. Anderson, I see that you're actually two different people."
It's hilarious, yes.
Yeah, it's the psychological side. Because all of us kind of have that internal duality as part of this search within anyway. Yeah, sometimes we can be nice, and then sometimes we do things we go, "Wait a minute, why'd I do that?"
Right.
That's out of character. Anyway, so the next thing that happens for him is they put the tracer program in him, and they got to get that out of him. And it really is part of that path that I saw. And I remember, I can give you a clear example when I started studying constitutional law, court opinions, decisions, and combining that with international law. I looked at Sherry one day and I said, is it possible that everything we were taught was a lie? Mm-hmm. And what it reminds me of is that scene where they finally get him, and you know, he's dumped out of the Matrix into the water,
right,
and they have to take that grappling hook and pull him out, right?
Right.
And the first thing Morpheus says is, "Welcome to the real world."
That's hilarious.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's it is part of that wake up for us, you know. And I tell people this too, over all these years, because I have a website. We've done teaching. We've archived lots of material on the DVD. We're coming out with new information, because in the United States of America and worldwide, ignorance of the law is no excuse. Mm-hmm. And what I do is demystify that and turn it back into contract, because being a contract expert and being in business, it's like, okay, well, they called it a constitution, but it's just a contract. Or they called it a treaty. Well, that's an agreement between two nations or a whole bunch of nations. Okay, it's a contract. So these are just fancier names. Law is another name for contract. You never go into court and there's not some sort of contract dispute.
Right.
Even, you know, theft, murder, vehicles, homicide, manslaughter, it doesn't matter, because the societal contract is those things are wrong. So you have an agreement with all of society that you're not going to act that way. Mm-hmm. And then when you do act that way, you're in violation of that contract, and here comes the agents, and then the judge is there to say, okay, did you actually do this or not? That's going to be the next determination, right? Mm-hmm. But it's still based in contract. You're a citizen. You've agreed to these rules and regulations. Doesn't matter whether you like them or not. You're still part of the society. Oh, wait a minute. If it's feeling like the Matrix, there was that key maker again.
Right.
So there are elements of that all apply.
Let me ask you a question. Psychologically speaking, you know, I think a lot of people when they're watching that movie, I think to some degree maybe it was subconsciously they realized that maybe things aren't actually as they seem, I guess, to some degree. And I think that a lot of times when we don't really know all the answers, or we don't have all the information, like anything, you know, for example, let's say that you end up getting into a relationship with somebody and they haven't been really completely honest with you about their past. You know, for example, maybe you buy a property and some things were excluded from that contract that needed to be talked about, but you find out later on. You know, there have been plenty of movies made about, you know, places that are literally like, you know, money pit and everything, that things just fall apart. But I feel that a lot of times when we are in a system, whether that's at work or in a relationship, when we know that we don't really know all the answers, it can add to kind of an uncertainty, but also almost an insecurity.
Well, it's a deep insecurity, because part of that, I mean, fear is just internally rooted into our nervous system. And one of our fears is that when we're in a situation that's unknown and we don't know something, it's like being in a room where you speak English and everybody else is speaking something different, and you have no clue what's going on. And that's where Neo found himself, even sitting in front of Morpheus for the first time. He says, like what you just said, you know something. Mm-hmm. What you know, you can't define, right?
Right.
And then he tells him, Neo, you were born a slave. You were, I mean, like everyone else, you know. And that was the purpose of the red pill and the blue pill, was to wake up. Now, the exciting thing to me about knowledge and education and educating yourself is that the more you grab onto, it's like it starts changing your paradigms, it starts changing your belief systems. But the other thing it does is knowledge brings a lot of confidence. Now, when I say knowledge, I don't mean just learning anything. I'm talking about the right knowledge, the things that are going to empower you. Wrong knowledge, that's what you're already dealing with, right? That's not going to help at all. And one of the things that I came up with in this process was my own maxims and things that I believe in now. And so, like you say, we're deconstructing the Matrix. I used to just sit around and see if I could deconstruct famous quotes and things like that. We've all heard the famous quote, "The knowledge is power." And what I realized was that I had a lot of knowledge at that time. I mean, I had been in the military. I was in the Navy. I was a Navy nuclear power engineer on board submarine.
Wow.
Yeah, that was a long time ago. This is the conversation you and I have never had. But I was good at math and I was good at physics, which is the reason why I became good at the legal side, because in math and physics, everything operates by a procedure. All these courts, everything operates by procedure. Contracts follow procedures. And but the biggest thing for me was like all this false knowledge I had that I was replacing with better knowledge made me realize that, okay, knowledge is not power, because the wrong knowledge creates no power. And then even if you have the right knowledge and you take the wrong actions, you're not creating any power. You have to combine both, the right knowledge and the right actions to create power.
Right.
So I would do things like that. I know that one that I had mentioned to you was, and there's a lot of people that will use this quote. It was attributed to Edmund Burke way back in the Revolutionary days and all that stuff. And I don't know whether he actually said it or not. It was just attributed to him. They don't really know whether he said it, but we'll just say it was him.
Okay.
But the quote was, "The only thing for evil to persist is when good men do nothing." And I was thinking about that and I went, wait a minute. Good men do nothing. Okay, something's wrong here. Well, what makes them good men if they do nothing? You have to do something to be considered good, right?
Right.
So sometimes these things in our life that we think are actually good quotes and things, we need to little sit back and go, wait a minute, let's analyze this and see if this is serving me.
That's true. And you know what's interesting about that significance is that I've done several videos on the way that we talk about ourselves, the mental record, the negative broken record even. And often many of us are basically holding ourselves back based on negative insecurities, based on self-esteem issues, thoughts that we've created in our own mind that basically imprison us in our own head and imprison us in our own life. Like you were talking about the quotes, "Good men do nothing." I mean, that makes absolutely no sense whatsoever.
Right.
However, how many times are you going to see somebody quote that on Facebook? You know, hey, this is really, really important. You know, this is profound. And you're thinking, am I missing something? Do I not get the brunt of the joke? I'm not really sure. But I think this applies to everybody out here watching this video right now, is that how much negative stuff, how much self-deprecating things are you exposing yourself to, are you thinking about, and how much of that negative or wrong type thinking is really encapsulating you in a life that you're really unhappy with?
I can tell you, just listening to what you're saying there, one of the things, you know, I've just mentioned, once you start getting that confidence and having the right knowledge or whatever, it starts unwinding part of that. But I think one of the things that a lot of us get into, and maybe we lock onto a quote like that for this reason, we really want to blame someone else, okay, when good men do nothing. So evil is persisting because good is doing nothing. Well, that honestly, you know, it doesn't make any sense, but people lock into it because they perceive this evil out here and they feel powerless to do anything about it. But they don't want to consider themselves to be bad, okay?
Right.
And I didn't either, but I did realize that there's one of the words that you find in law is this little word called collusion. It's like, wait a minute, they're doing something bad. Oh, wait a minute, I'm on the same paperwork they're on. I'm in collusion with them. Wait a minute. Oh, that entire society's doing something bad. Am I part of that? And so we want to still feel like we're good people. We feel we're good inside. But then again, we really, really need to analyze what we're doing, what our states are doing, what our society's doing, what our families are doing, and what our part is in that. And then, because the only way you're going to take control is to not blame and not complain and not protest and not gripe, because those things accomplish nothing. And that was the interesting thing about the Matrix movie. If you looked at them, I mean, it was an action movie, right?
Right.
So they were always taking action. But they were always analyzing what they were doing so that they could take, you know, the right steps and move in the right direction. And of course, ultimately that, as she told him in that scene with the oracle that we were talking about, she said, well, you're going to have to go back to the source where the path of the one ends. So going back to the source, this is interesting because, you know, I'll talk a little bit more about my background. 21 of us in 2004 sued the IRS at the United States Supreme Court.
Wow.
We actually filed it as a tort claim, and we didn't do it for any monetary damage. We were asking legal questions that pertain to how these things operate, how this matrix operates. And if you want, would you like for me to talk about that a little deeper about the IRS programming?
I think it might be interesting because it directly relates to what we're talking about today.
Okay. Because this is something I mentioned to you, and the IRS software program that runs their mainframe is called the Leontief matrix. Okay? This is where the name of the movie came from, and you can find this printed in different places. Scientific America did a reprint on Vasily Leontief, who was this master genius mathematician who figured out all the input-output data in the United States economy by using a math called matrices math. And once he was done, they took those formulas and they turned it into a software program called the Leontief matrix. And you can look up Leontief, I'll spell it for everyone, Leontief, Vasily, which is actually spelled with a W, Vasily Leontief. And if you type in Leontief matrix into Google search or Yahoo or whatever your favorite search engine is, that term will come up and you're going to get hundreds of thousands of hits. Because this whole input-output formula that he designed now is taught at almost every single university in the United States, including the Air Force. So when I finally understood it, I didn't understand it with the first movie, but finally when I did get to the end of the third movie, and in 2001 is when I found this term, the Leontief matrix, I went, holy cow, it's real and everybody's plugged in. This is not fake. They actually, someone behind the scenes put that information out, I guess, to the brothers that produced the movie. I'm not claiming that they know that the movie was about self-determination and this system called the Leontief matrix. I'll give you a bit of information that I may not have told you before. There has been an upgrade.
Really?
Remember the agents got upgraded?
Yes.
Yeah. You can also put in the term FAR matrix, F-A-R. It's Federal Acquisition Regulation Matrix.
Okay.
And there are as many codes in that Federal Acquisition Regulation Matrix as there are in the United States Code.
Wow.
It's unbelievable what they're tracking.
Really?
Everything. Waitress tips, everything. Everything is tracked.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Now this kind of stuff I put on my website. It's on my DVDs. I think there's a little video we did. Should have been redone a long time ago, but we are going to redo it. It's on one of the websites. It's called deprogrammingseries.com, actually. That should relate to the Matrix, right? We're going to deconstruct, deprogram, reprogram. And, you know, it's an interesting thing. Look at Leo living his entire life the way he did, right? He's in it for all these years. It ends up almost feeling like you've wasted your life. You're wasted your time because you're in this and you don't know you're in it. And it's one of the things that I realize about right information.
Yeah.
I wish I'd have got this information when I was like really, really young. Because if you look in the past, we weren't entertained in the past. I mean, look at the founders of the USA. John Quincy Adams, John Adams' son, he knew enough about international law at age 14 that he was appointed ambassador to Russia and the courts of Versailles at age 14.
Wow.
So what I like about in the teaching and stuff I do now is like, what if you reach a younger generation? Because the only thing that's limiting us, we have so much capacity. We just have to fill it with the right information and take the right actions, and then we can accomplish so much more.
That's profound. You know, that's interesting. I mean, at the age 14, we're just getting to high school, you know, most people.
Well, he was personally trained by his father, who was an attorney, and his mother, who was no slouch. Abigail Adams was an incredible woman. And truly, you know, one of the best love stories ever around. I mean, those two guys, if you read his autobiography and the letters that they exchanged back and forth. Anyway, so the Matrix is actually real.
So let me ask you, so for anybody out there that's saying, you know, hey, I'm kind of where you are, David, I kind of get it, I kind of see the writing on the wall. what do you suggest? Because I think some people out there, they're okay with it. They got a good beat on things. They don't really want to deal with it. Some other folks get a little, well, quite frankly, stressed out about it, freaked out about it, not really knowing what to do. And some people just want to act like it doesn't even exist anyway because it just seems so overwhelming. What would be some of the, I guess, what would you tell people that are in one of those positions, especially somebody that recognizes it and works on a daily basis to just kind of put a lot of stuff in their life to do and not really focus on the obvious?
Well, for me, it honestly became a track of, it's like Star Trek, like a trek of me going down a path. You have to learn more. You have to learn a little bit of law. It does affect your daily life. I mean, you can't even roll out of the bed in the morning without, just the little trip to the bathroom to brush your teeth and all of that. Let's see, the plastics were regulated by OSHA so that they're not dangerous. The mattress you slept on has a tag on there that tells you if you tear the tag off, it's a federal crime. So we need to learn a little bit more about what's going on, right? And for me, in reading the U.S. Constitution for the first time years and years ago, there's a clause in there that says that Congress has the power to define and punish piracies and felonies committed on the high seas and offenses against the law of nations. And that's a book that's about this thick. I have a copy of it in my car. Carry it with me. But what that means is when they reference something like that, offenses against the law of nations, well, now you got to go read that to know what they're talking about. Right. So the Constitution is no longer one sheet of paper. It's all kinds of other stuff. Even when it says in Article 6 that Congress, this Constitution and all laws made in pursuance thereof and all international treaties shall be supreme law of the land. Okay, people say, well, the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. I'm like, are you forgetting those ands? Right. It said, and every law passed. So the Constitution is not the Constitution. It's the Constitution and every single thing that they put into Congress, the Federal Registry, everything. It's all part of this. It makes it, the whole system is the supreme law of the land. So my advice is like I did. Once I started, one of the things it does for you when you increase your level of knowledge like this and you start learning how things actually work on this planet, you're so much more at peace with it. A lot of the stress goes away, and now you can sit back and go, oh, now I know why that happened.
Right. So knowledge is power if used properly.
Well, start with the law of nations. Start with something simple. And the great thing about the Law of Nations is there was 4 versions of it written, but Vattel's version was written in the 1700s. It was used mostly by the founders of the USA. It has been used more in the Supreme Court and the U.S. federal courts than any other version of the Law of Nations because it develops a basis of what's called customary international law. And all nation states are dealing with foreigners coming into their country, disputes between countries or whatever, and where these things are going to be settled. And even in United States law, there was a case called the Packet Habana, which the judge admitted international law has always been a part of United States law. It's real simple. The great thing about it is the treaties, the agreements, and those things that when I started reading those, they were written in plain English.
Really?
They're not written in legalese. You can actually go read them and understand them. And the same thing is true with the Law of Nations. It's written in plain English.
So there's not a huge barrier to understanding because I think some people, we just get scared. You sign a contract or, for example, a lot of people have had they get hit in a motor vehicle accident and they go to a lawyer and they find an injury lawyer and they go through this process and they see, legalese. All this stuff is all legal jargon and stuff and you freak out about it when in reality, so the Law of Nations is written just in plain English so people can read it. So it's not all that.
And not only that, it's not just law. It's basic principles of, for instance, book number 2 talks about the offices of humanity and how nations should be treating other nations. And this ought to shock you, okay? It actually says in book 2, section 11, that nations cannot mutually enact these offices of humanities and help and assist each other unless they mutually love each other. Wow, the word love is in the law. How about that?
Wow, that's interesting.
So, and then in Article 20, it actually says that finally the civilized nations of the world recognize that all men are brethren, when is that happy time going to come that they start behaving as such?
Interesting.
So I have the same question. When is that time coming that we're all going to start behaving like brothers one to another, right?
I agree. It'd be a much better place to live.
Absolutely.
If we realized we weren't no different than anybody else. It's interesting how people feel that way. It's kind of like the biggest ruse that was ever played on anybody, you know, is the fact that we're not all connected, we're not all brothers and sisters.
And yet we are.
Yeah, that's
and
what
this
I'm saying.
planet is our planet. It's our home.
Mm-hmm.
Look what we're doing to it.
It's pretty.
Right?
It's horrible.
Right. And not only that, and to each other. And, you know, because I look at it, here's a philosophical thing. I don't care whether you believe in Big Bang evolution or Big Bang cosmology or whether you believe in a creator. It makes no difference to me one way or the other. As Thomas Jefferson said, whether my neighbor believes in one God, no gods, or 20 gods does me no harm. So either way, this is still our planet.
Right.
It's where we live. Why would you mess that up? You know, why would you
Exactly.
foul your own nest, so to speak, right?
Right.
And where was this thing? It's like, oh, I think we should go down there and kill each other.
Great idea. Great idea.
Well, but there again, see, back to that societal contract, there's not a single society anywhere where murder is actually condoned. The only place it is condoned, and I actually said this in my one of my DVD sessions that I was training with somebody, and I asked him this question. I said, listen, is it legal, ethical, moral, or lawful to hire a hitman to kill your next door neighbor? And he went, well, no, it's not. Of course not. It's not legal. I said, well then, why was it legal to go kill a bunch of people over a lie called weapons of mass destruction? And he went, well, I guess it wasn't. I said, oh, wait a minute, let me get this straight. So murder's okay as long as it's done hundreds of thousands at a time?
Right.
No, it's not okay. We're all here together. We have to make it together.
That's so true.
Yeah, and that was our motto. When I first came out with that website, rightofselfdetermination.com, it was called Matrix Solutions. I branded it as Matrix Solutions. And the very top motto on the website says, we don't have to make it perfect, we just have to make it.
I love that.
Anyway.
Last thoughts for this video. I'd like to have you back in the studio, but last thoughts for right now.
Well, in deconstructing the matrix and putting all that thing together, there's always the side stories, right? And there's the story you don't see. Self-determination was the story that most people don't see because they don't know about it. The story that everybody saw was that Smith and Neo were opposites.
Right.
And what was Smith? Well, the Oracle told him, he's you, Neo. He's your opposite. Well, let's remember what Smith had to say about that. Me, me, me. The good thing about being me is there's so many me's. Right?
Right.
But he'd also told Neo that it was inevitable. He kept telling him, it's inevitable, Mr. Anderson. And finally, at the end of the movie, near the end of the movie, when they're in that fight, he calls him Neo instead of Mr. Anderson. And that's it. And then you see the inevitability was that he couldn't defeat the me attitude. He had to accept it. That was the inevitability. For him to actually get control of the me attitude, he had to accept it back within himself. And then that way, you see the light, and Smith then disappears. So that's part of our journey, getting rid of that ego, getting it in check, the me attitude. I'm not saying people shouldn't have self-interest.
Right.
As Jim Rohn, one of the mentors that I used to listen to a long time ago, said, he said, you heard that little quote that says, if I'll take care of you if you'll take care of me. There's a lot of that goes on in relationship, right? He said, I realized how shallow and short-ended that was, so I changed it to say, I will take care of me for you if you will please take care of you for me. Okay? So this is the kind of thing that excites me about people in knowledge and education and learning and that. And if we're going to finish up on the Matrix to say anything about it and come back to that little thing where I said that it wasn't what people thought it was and it was about the right of self-determination, Neo didn't have to die. That part I didn't care about as far as the movie. I mean, come on, he just accepted he had an ego. He didn't have to die for that, right?
Right.
That's all some other philosophy, and we won't get into that because he was the one and all that kind of thing. No one on this planet's the one. You know, that's too much ego. But there's that ending scene after Neo does die, and he goes to the city. You know, he does go back to Source, and of course the machine gets all upset. He says, "Look, Smith's destroyed the Matrix. The me attitude's destroyed the Matrix. Now it's going to come in here and destroy you." And the machine says, "We don't need you. We need nothing." And it's all upset. And Neo says, "Well, if that's true, then I made a mistake, and you should kill me right now. Get this over with." And then the machine comes down and says, "What do you want?" And Neo says, "Peace." The right of self-determination, that new key I was talking about, and that sometimes a better program gets written, the right of self-determination is found in treaties under peaceful settlement of dispute. And it is the right to create a new state, to change your political status, to do those kind of things. And the interesting part of that was the final scene in the movie was when the architect comes back up to the Oracle. She's in the park, remember?
I remember that.
Okay. She's in the park. And the first thing he says is, "You played a dangerous game." And she said, "Change always is." Change is always that way, right?
It is.
It doesn't have to be, but that we're back into that fear element again.
Exactly.
And then he says, "How long do you think the peace is going to last?" She says, "As long as it can." And he turns and walks away, and she says, "What about the others?" And he looks back and he says, "What others?" She said, "Those that still want out." And he says, "Well, obviously they'll be freed."
Right.
And she said, "I have your word." He said, "What do you think I am, a human?" In other words, I know how to keep my word.
Right.
So, and that was kind of a backhanded slap at humanity anyway. You got to keep your word. You got to keep your contracts. You got to keep your agreements. I love this word that we all created. We talk about the universe and universal things. But what does the word verse mean? You know, one word, one word, one song. We're supposed to sing together, one agreement, one contract. You got to keep your agreements.
True. I've enjoyed talking with you today.
Yeah, this is fun. I love talking about that movie.
It's a great movie, and it's a great concept of what we're really dealing with, and it's very powerful. And I like what you said. We have to keep our words, and it's about keeping true to ourselves. You know, really connecting to our highest calling, the best good, the best version of us. And it's not about being better than our friends or people we run into on a daily basis. It's about actually being better than we were yesterday.
Absolutely.
And I think that's key. And I think when we focus on, it's not like you were saying, like Dave was saying, it's not about, you can have self-interest as far as doing what's right for you, but also at the same time understanding that when we give back and we do what's right for everybody around us, it does come back to us tenfold. And it's the right thing to do. And oftentimes I found too that when we are so stuck in self, it can be overwhelming, almost depressing, because we aren't helping other people. We're not helping people that have less than us, and we're not being able to put our life in perspective properly to understand that.
I totally agree. You just said something that it's reminding me of something that I learned in myself along the path, and it was something that had to change in me. And that is, you don't compete with other people. My life is not about my competition with others. My life is about my competition with myself, to be the better, to get better, to improve, and helping other people. I'll just give you an example. We'll talk about it more maybe at another time about international things that we are doing. I didn't do this for no reason. I mean, we're working in Liberia, Uganda, Ghana, Philippines, and just this morning I got a phone call from the person that helped us get our foot in the door with Liberia. We've set up an education system there, doing computer labs and things. We now have 30 students in this, and I've gotten letters of thank you and recognition and things back from the Department of Health in Uganda. This is in Liberia. Department of Health, Department of Education, and they're actually now talking about giving us accreditation where we can get it set up and it'll be a .edu and stuff like that.
Nice.
It's really cool.
Congratulations.
Thanks.
Well, I
enjoyed
can't wait
that.
to have you back on. We can talk more about that. And thank you so much for coming on today.
I enjoyed it.
And just be aware, as we're more aware in our life, as we see things more clearly, as we allow ourselves to be, it's an amazing, powerful thing. The more knowledge you have, the more right knowledge and using it properly, as well as the way we treat others and the way we treat ourselves directly relates to how we see the world. I look forward to seeing you again next week. Thanks for tuning in. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. And if this video has helped you or inspired you or kind of opened your mind in a way, please click the like button, and any comments that you'd like to leave, I would love to read those as well. Okay, don't forget, by the way, throughout all this, no matter what, to continue to live your true life.